Hi, hello, it's Nikki, and welcome to my messy bookshelves. Today I wanted to talk about the books that I read in the month of May, so my May wrap-up. I read a total of 8 books. One of them was a combination of audio and the physical book as well. So it was a little bit of a strange reading month. I had a little bit of a reading slump, and you will see. So the first book that I read, I have talked about on this channel before, and that is Endurance by Alfred Lansing. And this book follows the journey and the adventures of Sir Ernest Shackleton and his ill-fated voyage on the Endurance to Antarctica. And it was wonderful. It was the first book I read this month or in May, and I loved it so much. And I think that partly caused me to go into a reading slump. But yes, highly recommend that book. The next book that I read was one that has been started and restarted multiple times, and I finally got around to it. And this was actually on my TBR for the month of May. And that is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I finally finished it. I enjoyed it. This book follows a young street urchin named Vin who has some sort of power, and she meets up with a group of individuals who are able to explain to her what power it is that she possesses. And there is an evil government, and yes, I don't want to say much more than that, but it was very enjoyable. I see why people love it. It's a unique magic system that I don't think I've ever come across anything like it, and I enjoyed it. I picked up book 2 from the library, and then I just wasn't feeling like opening it. So I kind of fell into a little bit of a reading slump after that one. But yeah. The next book that I read, finally, was A Court of Thorns and Roses, which has been on my shelf for a while, and I finally decided to read it. So this one is another fantasy that centers around humans in a small village that are scared of the forest because there are fae creatures in the forest. So I don't want to say much more. I know I'm probably like the last person that hadn't read this book, and I finally did. I enjoyed it. I actually picked up book 2. Did not start it because two fantasy book 1s in different series back to back was a little much for me. So yes. The next one that I read was The Landower Legacy by Victoria Holt. This one is a reread. It was sort of a comforting something to read while I was not sure what I wanted to read next. Oh, and this one follows a young woman in Victorian England during the time of Queen Victoria's Jubilee, and it is a gothic romance. The next one that I read was Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, and this one is a very detailed sort of first-person narrative centered around a person who is attracted to young girls. And it follows the story of him becoming fascinated and what he thinks falling in love with his wife's daughter, who is 12 years old. And the writing was beautiful. I talked about it on my channel before. I had to stop and pick it back up. But I did get through it because I honestly wanted to know how it ended, because it opens in such a way that you are expecting a certain ending to happen and you want to see how it ends. So read this. Probably will never reread it, but I guess I am glad that I did. I continuously, in the last week or two since I have read it, I think about it. So, yeah. The next one that I read was already on my shelf, but then I heard Pat at Book Chat with Pat talking about how much she loved it, and it is What Moves the Dead. I finally picked, well, not finally, I bought it maybe a couple of months ago, but it's been sitting on my shelf. But she loved it. I picked it up. It was horror mayhem, and yeah, I loved it. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed the, I guess, twist, maybe not necessarily a twist in this book, but it is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which I now have to go read because I really enjoyed this. So, a horror that was not too scary. Really enjoyed that. And then, also, recommended by Pat because she was on a roll, I went out and bought this after I read that one. So this is What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher, and it follows the same characters in a different setting, and I liked it very much. They are in the main character's hometown, and they encounter a I guess a creature that likes to come and feast at night in people's dreams. And I will say no more than that. I enjoyed it very, very much. I really like the characters in these two books. And I will probably read more if there are more to come. But I didn't like it quite as much as the last one, because the last one, the plot made a little more sense, I want to say. I just couldn't understand why people were doing the stuff that they were doing in this book. However, the characters make it with this book, and I did enjoy the story. I'm not saying it was a poorly written plot, but it wasn't as good as the other ones, but I loved it and I would recommend. Anyway, another horror. And the last one that I read was another one that I had been wanting to read that has been on my TBR for forever. I had gotten through maybe 100 pages of it and kept stopping, and yeah. And that is Anna and the King of Siam by Margaret Landon. And I read this in a combination of audio and the physical book. And I'm very glad that I finally got through this. I'm happy because I finally got through a book that has been sitting half read on my shelf for years. But I am also glad because it was a wonderful story, and it was based on a true story. I went and looked her up after I finished reading, and honestly, the author's note in here is just as interesting as the story, because the author was so fascinated with the main character, Anna Leonowens, because they had both lived in what was then Siam and what is now Thailand. And the author was so fascinated by the accounts that Anna Leonowens wrote of her time in Siam that she wanted to write a book about it. And she collected the copies of the actual letters that Anna received from the king and the various members of the royal family, and she collected the works of Anna herself. So I really enjoyed this. I love books that take place somewhere else than where I live, in a different time period. And very interesting. I liked it very much, and I would recommend it. But yeah, that is it for everything that I have finished in the month of May. I would not say that it was as great a reading month as April was, because I was in a reading slump for part of it. And I have a love-hate relationship with at least one of these books. And of course, I'm talking about Lolita. I felt icky while I was reading it. So there was that. And then 2 book ones and 2 fantasy series. Probably won't do that again back to back, I think. But yeah, still enjoyable. And I thank you so much if you've made it to the end of this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.